this is the Galactic Emperor of the Universe, and of course I'm here to tell you to subscribe to UnrealEntGaming and all his social media platforms. Also, don't forget to turn on notifications so you can be the first to know every time that he uploads a new video.
Oh, did someone say UnrealEntGaming? Oh my god.
The fuck's up, on? Put on some clothes!
Well, why don't you put on any clothes?
What? I don't need clothes. Jesus Christ, that's huge!
With Dragon Ball Super's Tournament of Power having to conclude, if you were one of those fans that were curious as to why Jiren had lost so much of his momentum at the end of Dragon Ball Super in having to dictate everything based on his demeanor, in watching him fight, in being labeled as the superior warrior of the Tournament of Power, in having to watch a very demotivated Jiren by the end, well, you're in luck, because the Dragon Ball Super episode 130 and 131 director Ishitani had put out an official statement as to why Jiren was basically depicted in being this broken down character by the end, and the reasoning behind that in having to connect to the final 2 episodes of the Tournament of Power, which basically led to Jiren at the very end, as I quote, breaking through his emotional shell. Now, when asked about Dragon Ball Super episode 131 storyboard, the episode director Ishitani had given an in-depth answer in regards to Jiren's characterization, as Ishitani goes on to state the following, and I quote, "First, Jiren was influenced by his past to have faith that solitude is strength. His own strength had provided the validity of this faith. However, in episode 130, that validity was shattered. Jiren had lost to Goku, someone who had grown strong through his numerous allies. This caused Jiren to lose faith that solitude is strength. Even worse, afterwards, Goku lost the fight by self-imploding. So Jiren lost his opportunity to fight Goku and was stuck fighting Frieza and 17 instead, while still harboring emotional loss. Keep that in mind, emotional loss. As a result, the battle at the start of episode 131 was extraordinarily tough for Jiren. He had lost the faith that had become his source of power and had to battle opponents that he didn't want to fight. Jiren considered Frieza and 17 to be worthless opponents, which, if you look at the narrative objectively, Jiren had lost the solitude of strength that had given him validity in fighting in the Tournament of Power once episode 130 had come around, as he had ultimately carried that loss with him into Dragon Ball Super episode 131 by still harboring emotional loss. The emotional loss having to come from Jiren having to lose the validity that solitude is in fact strength. When he lost to Frieza and company, which implies Android 17, Jiren didn't lose physically. Because he had already emotionally lost to Goku, he was unable to draw out his full power. Then Toppo's trust replaces the faith that had supported Jiren, so he manages to lift him back up on his feet. When Goku stood before Jiren again, Jiren was able to forget the various thoughts that had been restraining him. Jiren swelled with happiness due to his respect for Goku, who revived him from his beat-up state and for getting a second chance to finish their fight. On the other side of things, an earnest clash also unfolds between Goku and Frieza. They don't trust each other. So when you take a step back and you look at who technically had defeated Jiren, Jiren had technically defeated himself, as it was went on to state Jiren didn't lose physically to Frieza in 17, but rather Jiren had defeated himself based on his emotional loss. The only other person that was able to physically conquer Jiren was in fact Goku, but based on Goku having to self-implode and losing that power, Jiren was defeated emotionally, and it's not like Jiren had even deemed Frieza and 17 to be worthy opponents to begin with, but it's the emotional loss that caused his physical body to crumble, which allowed 17 and Frieza to gain the upper hand on Jiren, because Jiren had lost the faith that he once had in solitude is strength. Until of course Toppo's trust was able to basically correct the mistakes that Jiren had made emotionally in disregarding the solitude for strength aspect and having to grow upon Toppo's trust. That's why it's blatantly stated that Toppo's trust replaces the faith that Jiren once had in his battle with Goku, Frieza, and Android 17. As the interview goes on to state, however, they can at least trust each other's strength, and 17's too, of course. The scene you mentioned in your tweet, where Jiren's barrier and Goku and company's barrier shatter like glass, strongly implies, and I quote, "There is now nothing separating Jiren from Goku and the others. Their various feelings that I described at length above are all blown away, allowing them to head to a final showdown that is a certain sense invigorating. nothing. And that's what this scene expresses visually. It therefore needed to be an invigorating and beautiful scene. Of course, Jiren's smile also implies that Jiren has broken through his emotional shell. Now, the premise as to why Jiren was the way he was at the end of Dragon Ball Super episode 130 and episode 131 all traces back to his emotional loss and having to be defeated, because keep in mind, Jiren doesn't take any L's. Jiren had never lost before. Jiren never knew what it was like to lose, especially having to be the only remaining member of your universe's team and fighting for the namesake of your universe, but at the same time having a very selfish motive in wanting to only fight Goku just because he deemed them worthy, and completely disregarding Frieza and 17 on the sidelines, which of course after his loss to Goku had shattered him completely, which by the end of course you can obviously tell that Jiren had regained confidence because he smiled, in which, as the director had stated, Jiren had broke through his emotional shell. But let's not also forget, Jiren was stuck with the mentality that solitude is strength. His pride was what got in the way, and only deeming Goku to be worthy, which to an extent kind of explains as to why Jiren never fought anybody else to begin with, because the only other person that had legitimately tested Jiren and pushing him in the boundaries of strength was in fact Goku. So after having to feel that L, Jiren never recovered. He never recovered, and it's safe to say if it were not for Toppo having to make that speech in uplifting Jiren's spirit by telling him that they were going to be there with him, it would have been safe to say at that given point Jiren probably would have been eliminated a lot sooner than how we originally saw. But let's not also forget there was a theme behind this, and the theme was that Jiren had deemed everybody to be inferior to him, which to an extent you can say that he wasn't really wrong in, but also kind of contradicts as to why he fought Hit, why he went up against Majikayo, characters of that nature, because I felt as if Jiren could have also have gone up against other warriors as well, but the way they're labeling Jiren out now, they're kind of painting him out to be this almighty character in which never saw anybody as a threat, which basically according to this interview kind of puts Frieza and 17 as inferior fighters when compared to Jiren. Because remember, Jiren had seen what 17 and Golden Frieza had done and never once looked at them as if they were worthy or equal to be on a comparative level to himself, which of course the only other person he had seen as an equal was in fact Goku. Not just because that Goku had given him his first L, but even prior to that, in seeing the exponential growth behind Goku is what piqued his curiosity. Not because Golden Frieza and 17 together were a threat, but because Jiren was already defeated. Jiren was already going into that fight emotionally defeated, and is what led to him physically crumbling when fighting up against Frieza and 17 by the end. It's not the fact that Frieza and 17 were able to physically push him back because they had enough power, no, it's because Jiren was harboring emotional loss and of course the emotional defeat he had against Goku that carried the fight on, in him having to be basically rendered as a defeated warrior by many. But of course if it were not for Toppo, Jiren would have been gone and Universe 11 would have been wiped out. Now granted, Dragon Ball Super did have poor writing, especially for the Tournament of Power and especially for Jiren's character, introducing him as a very bland character, as nobody took any interest in him aside from the fact that he was very strong. But I felt as if they were trying to really rush in Jiren's story by the end in getting people to care based on his backstory of his parents having to be destroyed. And no, there is no indication that Broly was the one that destroyed Jiren's parents, but it is implied that this character, this person, had gone through so much, and after having to go through that again with Goku and feeling what it was like to lose, that broke him. That was all that was needed to break his spirits and allowing him to crumble as a physical fighter as the tournament continued. But in the end, I would like to get your thoughts in the comment section below. How do you guys feel about Jiren having to harbor emotional loss carrying all the way through by the very end of the tournament? What are your overall thoughts on Toppo having to uplift Jiren's spirit that much more in fighting against Universe 7? What are your thoughts on Jiren having to break beyond the boundaries of having to limit himself in being cocooned in this emotional shell? And what are your overall thoughts on the future of Jiren in the world of Dragon Ball Super? Let me know your thoughts down below, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. If you guys love Dragon Ball, slap a like down below. If you guys want to see more of Jiren in the future, which I personally do, slap a like down below, guys. Thank you all so much for watching. Tune back in for more, and I'll check you guys in the next video. Take it easy, everybody. Peace.